RFI, Radio France International.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's Paris Live on this Thursday, 6th of June. My name's Olia Horton. Over the next hour, we'll be bringing you news and features from here in France and across the world. Coming up, we'll be hearing about the ceremonies and events taking place to mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy. We'll also be featuring a report on the rise of prescription and use of opioid painkillers here in France over the last 15 years. And our special guest is Nick Norbrook, the managing editor of the Africa Report, who will be in the studio to discuss the crisis in Sudan and East African politics. Paris Live is broadcast every Monday to Friday, 1300 hours GMT across our FMs in Africa. We're also streaming on YouTube, and you can find our podcast online, rfienglish.com. Do stay with us.
In France today.
The French and US Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump have this morning attended an official ceremony marking the 75th anniversary of the D-Day invasion of the 6th of June 1944, a major turning point in World War II. Both leaders made speeches at the US cemetery in Colleville-sur-Mer in Normandy, paying tribute to US veterans, some of whom were sitting in the front row, many of them in wheelchairs. RFI's Mike Woods was there and he described the scene for me.
Well, Leah, the ceremony was held at the Normandy American Ceremony outside of Colleville-sur-Mer, just beside Omaha Beach here in the French region of Normandy. This is the famous ceremony that we often see in popular culture, with the lines of white crosses that bear the final resting places of more than 9,000 fallen U.S. soldiers. Today's ceremony was attended by 160 veterans, including 35 who stormed the beach of Normandy here 75 years ago today. They're just over half of the 60 known remaining U.S. D-Day veterans. Presidents Trump and Macron greeted them and before giving speeches, laying a wreath, and the ceremony closed with flyovers of U.S. and French military planes.
Now, Mike, tell us a little bit more about what was said in the speeches.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron spoke first. His message was France has not forgotten what the veterans came to do here. At one point, he turned to them and he addressed them in English. He said, "On behalf of our nation, I want to say thank you." In one of the more political moments of the ceremony, as expected, Macron urged Trump to honor the U.S.'s alliances with France and other Western nations, and the multilateral ties that have defined the post-war period. He ended his speech with the lines, "Long live the friendship between our two nations." When Trump gave his speech, he focused really on the stories, three different stories, two on U.S. veterans who were present, and also one about a French woman who was the descendant of somebody who fell here 75 years ago. Trump said the Franco-American alliance is unbreakable, forged over years of war and peace, and his speech really was really heavy on themes of duty, honor, freedom, and what he called the human heart.
You've been speaking to quite a few people this morning after the ceremony. What did they have to say?
I was speaking with a lot of young people. I spoke with Ayana Jolie-Trottier, who's an 18-year-old high school graduate from Belcourt, North Dakota. She was here with a group of friends on a European trip, and this is what she had to say about why they came here.
We've been here for a couple of days now. We were just in Berlin, and then we came down for this event today. Just to pay our respects and honor everybody who fought in this war and who gave their life and really served our country and helped out here as well. With the turnout here today, I think if it continues like this, it will be sad when there's no longer any living veterans left. But hopefully they can carry this on strongly, even without that live presence here.
I also spoke with Chris Gamble. He's a 51-year-old veteran himself of the First Gulf War, and today he's a high school teacher. He's organized a class trip of his grade 11 students, and he talked a little bit about why he did that.
This could very well be the last D-Day that has, too many survivors, or at least visible. I've run into about 5 or 6 of them so far, but, I would imagine in 5 years from now that will be a lot less. So that's another reason I came for this one, because I told the students that this may be the last time you ever see anyone who was here, and you can actually talk and, shake hands with them and show your appreciation.
I also spoke with two of his students, Tom McMillan and Chris Baker, and they had this to say about their decision to come on this trip.
So we were studying World War II, and I knew about the trip, and I really wanted to go, but wasn't able to afford it at the time. And then we were starting to study World War II in class, and I got really interested into it. So I somehow convinced my mom, and we made it happen. So it's a great experience.
I've had Mr. Gamble all year, and he's been talking about it a lot. And I thought in the beginning, oh, that seems interesting, but it might be like a little time consuming, especially because we're missing the second to last week of school right now. But then I realized getting closer, wow, most people won't even be able to learn in depth about this information rather than getting to experience it and like see it and watch it happen. And I really thought that was kind of like a once in a lifetime thing.
Now, on the last major anniversary 5 years ago, this is the 70th anniversary in 2014, there were about 12,000 people attending this ceremony. Today's goal was at least to match that, if not exceed it.
That was RFI's Mike Woods covering the D-Day ceremonies in Normandy.
In the cold grey light of the 6th of June in the year of 44, the Empire Arch sailed out from Pole to join with thousands more, the largest fleet the world had seen.
The Shores of Normandy by Jim Radford, an appropriate song, if there ever was one to play today for the D-Day commemorations. RFI's Alison Hurd joins me in the studio now for a bit of background on this song. Alison, it's been number one on the Amazon charts, is that right?
Yes, it's really taken off, Olia, partly because of the video that Jim Radford has recorded with him singing this song, and he's wearing his Marines outfit, all his medals, and he's a very dignified 91-year-old now. He was just 15 years old, though, when he enrolled as a galley boy on the Empire Larch vessel, and that vessel helped to build a harbour at Gold Beach, which then enabled the war effort in a big way for the Allies. So he's the youngest known D-Day veteran.
Now the Empire Larch was a deep-sea tug with a crew of 33, and I was just the galley boy on my first trip to sea. I little thought when I left home of the dreadful sights I'd see, but I came to manhood on the day that I first saw Normandy.
It's difficult not to get goosebumps, isn't it, Olia, listening to that? He's saying he came to manhood, witnessing the deaths of many of his comrades who were shot very, very quickly on the 6th of June, fell in the sea, and there he was, a 15-year-old, looking into the sea and seeing dead bodies. So he wrote the song back in 1969, in fact, first of all, after he first went back to Normandy for the first time, and he saw children playing on those very same beaches when such tragic events had taken place.
Such a contrasting image.
Yeah, totally contrasting. So proceeds from the sales of the song are going to the British Normandy Memorial. Theresa May and Emmanuel Macron are inaugurating that today. It's a sculpture on which the 22,442 names of those who died under British command are being commemorated. And by the way, the melody is very strong, isn't it? And I found out today that in fact, it's set to music, an Irish ballad called The Dawning of the Day, which is also known as Raglan Road. And thanks to Angela Diffley for pointing that out. Let's listen to the very last part of the song when the message is so very clear.
As the years pass by, I can still recall the men I saw that day, who died upon that blood-soaked sand, where now sweet children play. And those of you who were unborn, who've lived in liberty, remember those who made it so on the shores of Normandy.
Thank you very much to RFI's Alison Hurd for that musical look at the D-Day commemorations. Turning now to Qatar, which is entering its third year up against an economic blockade that was put in place by its neighbours. In 2017, Doha was sidelined by Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that accused the peninsula, among other things, of hostile reporting by the Qatar-based Al Jazeera TV station, interference in internal political affairs and support for terrorism. RFI's Jan van der Made spoke to Middle East specialist Gunther Meyer, director of the Centre for Research in the Arab World at the University of Mainz.
The main reason was obviously Al Jazeera, which reported in a very critical way about authoritarian development in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, as well as in the United Arab Emirates, those countries which signed the boycott of Qatar. Besides this critical reporting, Qatar is supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, while Muslim Brotherhood is presenting political Islam. And political Islam is extremely dangerous for the political system in the other four authoritarian Arab regimes.
We have seen states, including, of course, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and Bahrain, who are initiating all this blockade of goods. There was even some rumors that the Saudis wanted to dig a channel, virtually turning Qatar into an island. What effect did this blockade have on the daily life of the people?
In general, the impact as far as the population in Qatar is concerned is very little. One point, of course, is the border towards Saudi Arabia is blocked. So as far as traveling is concerned on land, this has become much more difficult. You mentioned also plans that a canal should separate the Saudi territory from Qatar. This has started. The border has been closed, which means in particular that many of the Bedouin tribes used to graze their camels in Saudi Arabia, for example. They are no longer able to pass from one country into the other. In many cases, the huge herds of camels could not return to Qatar. This was another important effect. At the beginning, there were also rumors of a military intervention and of the four Arab states, which, according to rumors, was prevented through the intervention of the United States.
Now, in 3 years' time, 2022, Qatar is set to organize the World Football Championships. How will this play out? How will this whole blockade situation, this boycott, play out for this football championship? Will these countries boycott the championships as well? Or do you think, is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
The Prime Minister attended the meeting in Mecca, which was at least a tiny step forward, shows there is not an absolute blockade. From the other point, as far as the football championship is concerned, it was the intention of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to blockade this, and they've tried quite a lot to hamper that the football championships could take in Qatar. However, they failed. They also tried to extend the number of teams which could attend the championships. This failed as well because there's not sufficient time actually to organize a different location for the championships. So there is a possibility that these four states will not attend and also put pressure on other Arab states not to come to Qatar. But this, again, is a very prestigious effect. And I don't think that Saudi Arabia in particular, but also Egypt, that they will miss this chance to participate in the World Championship. Under these circumstances, even if we don't know how the relation between Qatar and the other Arab states will develop in the future, but I don't think it is likely that the other Arab states will miss this chance to attend the World Championship.
That was Middle East specialist Gunther Meyer speaking to RFI's Jan van der Made.
Paris Live.
You may have heard that there is an opioid drug crisis in the United States. It started with prescriptions of painkillers like OxyContin, highly addictive opioids that got people hooked. In France, the prescription and use of these drugs has increased dramatically over the last 15 years, as have addictions and overdoses. 4 people a week die of overdoses from these types of painkillers in France. That's nowhere near the levels in the US, where around 130 people die a day, but it's enough of a concern to the health authorities. One of the most used and abused painkillers in France is tramadol. RFI's Grégoire Sauvage met a woman who got addicted and is now trying to fight it.
You wouldn't guess that Jasmine Bouarty is a drug addict, but she is.
Pour être comme je suis aujourd'hui, j'ai besoin d'avoir ma dose de tramadol. À l'heure actuelle,
to be like I am today, I need my dose of tramadol. Today my body needs it to be normal. If I don't get my dose, I'll have the same withdrawal symptoms of a heroin addict. I'll be nauseous, tingling legs, I'll get chills, I'll shake, throw up. I'll be extremely depressed, aggressive. I'm not at all an aggressive person. I'm incapable of doing harm to even an animal. But when I'm missing my tramadol, I could kill everyone. I scare myself.
de tramadol, je peux tuer tout le monde. Je me fais peur moi-même.
It's hard to imagine the 25-year-old has delicate features. She's sitting quietly in a park in Lyon. She had never taken drugs in her life, until she was prescribed tramadol in the spring of 2016 to treat pain related to a back surgery. Then she was told to continue the drug for endometriosis, a swelling of the uterus, which is very painful during menstruation. Tramadol, she was told, would help with the pain.
Au début, pour moi, c'était un antidouleur et j'avais même pas conscience.
At the beginning, for me, it was a painkiller. I had no idea that I would become an addict. I was told to take it when I had pain. I was not told about the addictiveness or about any side effects. I would have liked to be a bit more supervised and warned about the addiction. But when I was in pain at the time, I would take more. I'd say it's like paracetamol. It'll be even better. But actually, it intensifies the addiction and makes it happen faster.
Bouarty currently takes 100 milligrams of tramadol in the morning and 100 at night. Tramadol should be difficult to acquire in France. It's only available via a secure prescription and for a month at a time. But Bouarty says she had lots of access.
Quand je vais aux urgences, etc.
When I go to the ER or elsewhere, doctors re-prescribe tramadol. Even though I already have some, I already have a relatively high dose, but they prescribe even more, even though I tell them I am addicted.
Je leur dis bien que j'ai une dépendance.
She came to realize on her own that she had a problem.
Un jour, je me suis rendu compte que justement,
One day I realized that my pain didn't require such a strong painkiller every day. I said, you don't need it, so why do you take it every day? And that was a shock. I told myself, I'm 25 years old. I can't be dependent on a medication like this my whole life. I need to cut myself off. It helped me for a time, but now that I don't need it anymore, I have to find a way to separate myself.
Faut que j'arrive à m'en séparer.
Bouarty's situation does not surprise Delphine Luyery, a pain management doctor in Paris. She says doctors in France have not been trained in the best uses of opioids, which don't work on all kinds of pain.
Many doctors have not been fully trained on dealing with nerve pain, which is linked to neurological irritation rather than damaged muscular tissue. The treatment is very particular, and that lack of knowledge means certain medications are consumed because they're known as painkillers, even though they're not effective against certain kinds of pain.
Luyery specializes in treating endometriosis, which causes neurological pain that does not respond to opioids. However, she is optimistic that younger doctors are learning this. Pain management dates back about 15 years in France, and Luyery says it's already a good thing that pain is considered something to be treated.
Pain is treated much better and is better recognized today. Now we must take the step of educating both patients and doctors to propose treatments that are in line with the mechanism of their pain and to pay attention to the effects of the treatment, helpful or harmful. And this is how we manage this treatment.
Because for Luyery, an increase in opioid prescriptions is not necessarily bad, but they must be used correctly by doctors and patients.
For some types of pain, it's sometimes legitimate to take morphine without undesirable effects. Every time you get an operation, you get morphine, and it works.
It's about the proper use. Addictions and the related problems are a concern in France, but not nearly as bad as the United States. She says France has more limits.
In the US, there are no safeguards. Advertising drugs is allowed. In France, we're not allowed to advertise prescription drugs on television. There are safeguards in France that limit the misuse of these drugs.
As a pain management specialist, Louis Yuri says drugs are only one tool. Other things can work.
We could also treat it without medication. Physical approaches like osteopathy or mesopathy, and mental approaches because it's the brain that interprets pain. So things like meditation, psychotherapy, sophrology and hypnosis could be interesting.
Jasmine Bouarti is trying to do some of these things. Her primary care doctor sent her to a pain management clinic in Lyon, and for the last 2 months, they have been helping her quit tramadol. They have been reducing doses.
To deal
with the pain that's left, I've been taking therapeutic baths, doing physical therapy. I do a lot of breathing exercises with a physical therapist. I'm also looking at natural treatments. Grapefruit seed extract, aloe vera, that works pretty well. Heat sources too. I think I can handle it today with alternatives that are less harsh on my body.
She is about to enter a week-long hospital stay to try to completely cut off her tramadol use.
I'm a bit scared, to be honest, but I am reassured that I'll be supervised. If there is a problem, I'll have help and I won't be alone. I won't run the risk of hurting people around me. Afterwards, I'll be given a less strong painkiller for acute incidents, but I'd rather have a little bit of pain once in a while than be dependent for life on a drug like this.
Bouarti has regrets, but she does not blame her doctors.
I think they're not informed enough about this. I don't blame them, but I'd like to sound a warning. I'd like doctors to stop prescribing it for anything. I've seen people who got a tramadol prescription for a tooth extraction. That's not necessary. People should be warned of the danger of this drug. If there are other solutions, they should be used before prescribing tramadol.
That was RFI's Grégoire Sauvage with that report there, which was part of our weekly podcast Spotlight on France, which you can find from our website rfienglish.com.
Live on Live.
My special guest on Paris Live today is Nicholas Norbrook. He's the managing editor of the Africa Report, one of our regular visitors here in the studio. Welcome to the program, Nick. Thanks for finding time. I know you're a little bit on deadline.
It is press day. Everything is now with the printer. The world is at peace.
You can take a deep breath. Now, we've got two main subjects to discuss today. The first one is the crisis in Sudan. Protest leaders have turned down an offer by the ruling military council for talks. It's been going backwards and forwards. They're calling for justice after Monday's crackdown that doctors have said has left up to 100 people dead. But the Sudanese Health Ministry seem to be lowering that number and saying around 46. There have been protests for the last 6 months. They've led up to the military ousting of President Omar al-Bashir in April. And it looks like protesters are still calling for the generals to hand over control to a civilian government. And the most recent article you published is to focus on one of the key figures in this revolution, if we can call it that, is the General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name correctly. He's known as Hemeti. Maybe we could begin there with who is Hemeti. He's got a nickname, the Butcher of the Revolution, in your article. That gives us a little bit of an indication as to his reputation.
So he heads up a military force. There are now several military forces within Sudan. You have the sort of the classic army, you have the intelligence services, and you have the rapid support forces, the RSF, which are run by this general known as Hemeti. He is perhaps better known in Sudan for having been instrumental in putting down the uprising in Darfur in incredibly brutal fashion. The Janjaweed militia were reorganized. He ran essentially. He sort of hauled himself over several bodies to the top of the Janjaweed militia, and they were reorganized by Omar el-Bashir, the now former president, into the RSF, but they are essentially Hemeti's boys, and there are now 9,000 of them in the capital, Khartoum. And what they did over the last few days was to bring the tactics of Darfur, the rape, the beatings, the murder that was so commonplace in Darfur. They've taken these tactics right into the heart of the capital city, and it's important to point out that there is widespread revulsion within Khartoum for what has happened. And when we saw, I think in the last 24 hours, even Saudi Arabia and the Saudis have been backing Hemeti because Hemeti's been very useful, helping them prosecute their war in Yemen. But even Saudi Arabia in the last 24 hours has expressed its concern about what's happening in Khartoum. So that is, I hope, significant. But here's the problem. Hemeti, you can't have him there and you can't not have him there. If you were to try and take him out by force, you would cause a civil war because he's got very powerful backing from within and from without the country. At the same time, if he was to stay, essentially in charge of the military, there is the number one in the military council, a colleague of his who also helps the Gulf prosecute their war in Yemen. But he's essentially the man in charge. If he stays, then the protests will not stop. So we're in an extremely difficult situation in Sudan. And, the very latest that we hear is that there are big chunks of the military who are hostile to, I can't express enough the revulsion that's felt in Khartoum against what's going on. Junior officers also incredibly upset. The chances of a potential rift in the military, the chances of another coup, without wanting to overstate these things, they are very, very high right now.
So this so-called Transitional Military Council backtracked a little bit in the last couple of days and maybe under pressure from Saudi Arabia or the UAE, said, okay, we will negotiate. But the protesters are really, as you said, they're very, very angry and very unhappy. So it looks like this is a dead end for any form of peace talks.
Well, the protesters have said they've called for another general strike that will happen this weekend. That will no doubt be a call that is followed. Just today, a few hours ago, the African Union put out a pronouncement saying they were suspending Sudan from the organization. So there is now a ratcheting up of the diplomatic pressure as well. Whether that mixture of diplomatic and civilian pressure and perhaps pressure from, the guys funding Khartoum, perhaps that will move something. Again, perhaps. When you have President Trump good buddies with the ruler of the Gulf, the UAE rather, and also with Mohammed, with MBZ in Saudi Arabia, who knows?
And staying with this idea of kind of pressure, the European Union, I guess, we're wondering what is the European Union's stance on this whole thing. And it's a little bit difficult to know how European countries for sure would be saying we're against violence, and they've issued statements and so on. But it seems that in your article, you're raising the point that Hemeti is kind of a key player when it comes to negotiating with Europe in terms of this question of migrants, a migrant flow, and he may well be a key person, a key negotiator.
Well, he's managed to make himself essential to lots of different constituencies, Hemeti. And as you say, the relationship with Europe is a particularly complicated one, and I think plenty of European chancelleries have expressed outrage and shock, and plenty of them have, I don't know if relied is the right word, but they've certainly transacted with Hemeti in terms of stopping migrants, from Eritrea, from elsewhere, transiting through Khartoum, Sudanese migrants, or on their way to Europe. And the European Union has these deals with a number of countries in Africa to try and stem the flow of migrants. and these I think cause very uncomfortable questions for European politicians, especially at the moment when the national question, these ideas of immigration, etc., have torn Europe apart over the last 4 or 5 years.
Exactly. Now, moving on to another feature that you're going to be publishing in the Africa Report. It's called Fraternal Foes. It pertains to the very strained relationship between Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni and Rwanda's leader Paul Kagame. Why did you choose to focus on these two rivals who actually used to be allies?
Well, I mean, there has been over the last month increasing tension at the border between Uganda and Rwanda. There have been shootings just a week or so ago. Someone was shot dead. And it stems perhaps over their relationship, the degrading of their relationship, but also, the interests, the mining interests that both Rwanda and Uganda have in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They made common cause to kick out the Congolese president in the 1990s, Rwanda and Uganda, and then fell out, many believe squabbling over who should control what mineral rights. The amount of gold exported from Uganda has gone up by an incredible amount. I think just a decade ago, there's about $10 million worth of gold exported out of Uganda. And now, every time customs checks bags coming out of the country, they'll find a gold bar in the carry-on luggage. They're now exporting over $500 million worth of gold a year in Uganda. And Uganda doesn't really mine much gold. So it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, recently in March, the new president of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, came over to Kigali. We were having our Africa CEO Forum, which our company does, and he spoke. And there were, very emollient words between the president of Congo and the president of Rwanda, perhaps showing that there's been some, new diplomatic alignments. The militias between Congo and Rwanda are, supposed to be dying down in their intensity. And people wonder whether Uganda is bothered by that. Are they seeing their rival Rwanda taking up a more strategic position of influence in the Congo? So, we wanted to unpick these big economic, political issues, but also there's a personal story here. President Kagame, was the intelligence chief of Museveni and helped him topple Milton Obote, a long time ago. So they work together. They have a history of toppling tyrants, and they know each other very well. Perhaps family feuds are the most explosive.
Indeed. And what's interesting is that the article has interviews that were done, if I've understood correctly, face to face with these gentlemen. Yes. So these are interviews that were done in person and gathering the material for the interview. How hard was it to go about getting those interviews? Were there conditions posed upon you or censored? Or
No. I mean,
did they speak freely?
On my leg of the reporting, I sat down with President Kagame, with Patrick Smith, our editor-in-chief, and we had an extremely frank 3-hour discussion, which, at one point almost resulted in us having to end the interview. I jest, but things got heated. And funny story, after we finished the interview, we were getting the lift to go back down. The interview was held in the Ministry of Defense, so we were surrounded by soldiers. And when we got in the lift, it started normally, and then it suddenly stopped, and the power went out, and the light went out. And I thought perhaps we pushed it a bit far with the question, but everything went fine. We got our plane, no problem.
Okay. So, and just very quickly to wrap up, both of these leaders are very keen on staying in power. They've put into place mechanisms. So they're looking really at the long picture. So they're also looking at themselves as guarantors of the security in the region. So we might be seeing these two fellows around for much longer.
Well, I mean, time has a natural limit for man. And I think, the red card will be pulled out for Museveni sooner rather than later. He's a good bit older than President Kagame. We asked Kagame about succession plans. He said, they've got a very deep bench of talent, etc., without giving any precisions about when he might be inclined to leave office.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much to my special guest, Nicholas Norbrook from the Africa Report, for being my guest on Paris Live today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is the name of the little village in France which has happily and successfully welcomed refugees from many different countries? Listen to the Sound Kitchen podcast this Saturday and see if you're one of the lucky winners, and tease your brain with the new quiz question. That's the Sound Kitchen podcast, ready for you every Saturday on the RFI English website, rfienglish.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Paris Live.
RFI, live from Roland Garros.
That is the cue for the sports. And I'm going to be joined on the line in just a moment with Paul Myers, who's been following the tennis at Roland Garros. But before we get to the tennis, we've got a little bit of other sports news. Football, Paul.
That's right, Olia, because here in Europe, Portugal moved into the final of the Nations League after a 3-1 win over Switzerland. Cristiano Ronaldo got all of Portugal's goals. He scored 2 of them in the last 5 minutes. And the Confederation of African Football have ordered a replay of the African Champions League final. Esperance were awarded the trophy after the match against Wydad Casablanca last Saturday. It was abandoned following a dispute over a disallowed goal and the lack of the video assistant referee. Now, CAF say the second leg will be replayed at a neutral venue. Esperance say they'll take legal measures to keep the trophy.
No controversy, however, about the semi-finalists at the French Open tennis.
Yes, Ollie, but something of a shock because the third seed and defending champion Simona Halep is out. She went down in straight sets to the American teenager Amanda Anisimova. The 17-year-old beat her 6-2, 6-4 to reach her first semi-final at a Grand Slam tournament. And Anisimova said she never really felt comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, every time I had a lead and I was winning, I knew that I wasn't actually winning. I mean, I knew that she could come back at any moment, so I wasn't thinking about winning or not. I was just thinking about playing each point and trying to get ahead. And yeah, as it was getting closer, I mean, it was very tough and, nerves were kicking in a bit, but I was able to make a couple winners and necessary points and just play the tennis that I wanted to play today.
Well, Halep was trying to become the first woman since Serena Williams at Wimbledon in 2016 to retain a Grand Slam crown. It wasn't to be. She said it just really wasn't her day.
Well, I feel sad because every time when I lose, I'm sad and I'm a little bit upset because I couldn't make my game. I couldn't move normally, but, I think she played great, and I think that I've done everything I could today. And this tournament, I'm happy with the result. It's not bad at all to make quarterfinals at a Grand Slam. Coming as a defending champion, the pressure was on. But I think I had good matches, and I'm leaving this tournament with positive thoughts.
Well, earlier in the other quarter-final, the 8th seed Ashley Barty outmuscled the 14th seed Madison Keys. Barty won it 6-3, 7-5 to reach her first Grand Slam semi. The 23-year-old Australian is the highest seed left in the draw, and she'll take on the American, that's Anisimova, on Friday. The other women's semi-final will pit the 26th seed Joanna Konta. She'd never won a match before here in Paris in her 4 previous visits. She'll be up against the unseeded Czech teenager Markéta Vondrousova. So, Halep was asked, are you surprised at the semi-final lineup?
Well, nothing surprises me anymore in tennis, but if I have to choose, it's tough. I know Barty has a big chance also because she's very talented and she feels the ball. She played also well in the previous tournaments on clay, so I think she has the game to win the tournament. Konta is first time when she wins matches at Roland Garros, so everything can be possible. And the other two, they are very young, so maybe one of them has a chance to win the tournament. It would be nice to have like 18 both in the finals. Will be huge.
Well, that's Simona Halep there talking about the possibilities of an all-teen final on Saturday. That's something that nobody really has even thought about, and it's something that Guy Forget, the tournament director, said at the beginning that the women's draw was completely open, but not even he would have thought that two 18-year-olds could be gracing the final on Saturday. It's obviously not that. It's not going to be like that with the men's, or the because it's a load of old men really. It's it's Rafael Nadal at 33 against Roger Federer at 37, and the semi-finals could be with a 20-something. That's quite old really in comparison with the ladies. So the semi-finals will all be played on Friday because of the problems with the rain yesterday at Roland Garros. But sunny and very, very vibrant here at the moment, but more rain expected tomorrow. Olia.
All right, thank you very much to Paul Myers covering Roland Garros here in Paris, and he'll join us on the programme again tomorrow. Thanks, Paul.
Paris Live guest.
We're going to be staying with sports and turning to the Women's Football World Cup, which kicks off here in France tomorrow. It's expected to be the biggest yet in terms of viewing figures and bums on seats inside the stadiums. 24 teams will be battling it out for the top spot over the next 4 weeks. The competition comes at a time where there is growing debate about the equality between male and female players. And for more on that, I'm joined now in the studio by my colleague Rosie Collier, who is going to be covering the event for RFI. Rosie, over to you.
Well, actually, my coverage has already begun because all 24 teams have arrived here in France already, and I was with the Nigerian and the Norwegian teams yesterday in the city of Reims. That's in the kind of northeast of France. It's the Champagne capital. Yeah, so automatically a sort of celebratory feel to that city. So they're at their training grounds, and they're going to be facing each other on Saturday. But we're joined in the studio also by two special guests. Thank you both for being here. So first of all, Claire Bloomfield. She's a women's football journalist who's based in the UK, but you're here in Paris for the World Cup. Are you going to go beyond Paris, Claire?
Yes, I'll be following England throughout the duration of the tournament, and all being well, that'll be right through to the 7th of July.
It's looking confident.
Great that you're here with us today. Yeah, a lot of confidence there. And then also, thank you ever so much for being here, Ketavan Gojestani. You're a sports presenter just next door at our sister TV station, France 24. So thanks for being with us today. And as I said, I've been in the city of France with some players people who will be watching this perhaps later on our YouTube channel can see some of the players that I've been speaking to behind me. So with the Norwegian camp and the Nigerian camp. And what I took away really, especially from the Nigerian camp, there's a couple of players there that have, one who's played in 5 World Cups. Another girl I'm speaking to, Francesca Ordega, and she really is a girl. She's just 19 years old. She's a forward, very flamboyant young lady. She's played in 3 World Cups. And actually what she told me yesterday was that she really felt that this World Cup is better organised than any that she's been involved in before. And actually my meeting was with her during a photo shoot, her FIFA photo shoot. They were taking portraits of all the players that will probably be up on their website. So it's really a sense, for me at least, I took away just from that first kind of mission for this, is that this is going to be the biggest yet. So Claire, I know you've been speaking to a lot of players in the run-up to this World Cup. Which for you are the teams, players to watch out for besides England?
This World Cup for me is the most exciting Women's World Cup we've ever seen, by a long way. For me, it's no longer just a battle between Germany and the USA. It's wide open. And I think that is also because we've seen such an improvement in the leagues, particularly around Europe. And obviously, we know that the USA have a long history of developing young players and a strong league there. But I think now you can't rule out France. They obviously have the home advantage. There is obviously 7 Lyon players in that side. Corinne Diacre, I've been very impressed with what I've seen of her lately. I hear from the press conference she's done this morning that she also has a fully fit squad. So you have to obviously include France. I would also pick out England, of course. I mean, England have been absolutely phenomenal, besides that last unexpected hiccup against New Zealand last week. But I mean, they have, I know you mentioned their players who are going to multiple World Cups. We have Jill Scott, who is on her way to her 4th World Cup, who will be instrumental in that midfield role for England. So yeah, obviously Germany as well. We know they have pedigree, but I think, you know, some of the challenges we've seen before, the likes of Japan, I don't think they'll even come close. I think someone like that, although they're, you know, winners from 2011, I don't think they'll get past the last 16.
Interesting. So yeah, the decline of Japan perhaps, but obviously remains to be seen. But over to you, Ketavan. France 24, I know, are following France and the US mainly, obviously other teams as well. So tell us about some of the star players on each of those teams.
Well, of course, we're going to start with the US because they are the most star-studded team in this competition. They've been for a long time. So they have really this advertising power because everyone knows some of those players. I'm thinking, of course, of Alex Morgan. She is the superstar of that US team. She's on every single billboard across the United States. They went on a tour with friendly games throughout the US, and everywhere they went, there were thousands of people to come see them. So it was really, Alex Morgan is the face of that team. There's, of course, Megan Rapinoe. There's Carly Lloyd, the veteran who has been there for a while. So they have a lot of stars. And the French team, and Claire pointed out at the Lyon core of this French team, 7 players from Lyon. Lyon, of course, being the best team in Europe. They're 4-time Champions League winners, defending Champions League winners. They've won 17 national titles. So they really are the best team in France, best team in Europe. And 7 of those players are playing for the French squad. And of course, there are a few other stars. There's Marta, the Brazilian superstar, the women's Pelé, as she's been called. There's Jennifer Marajan for Germany, who also plays for Lyon. So a lot of names now that you recognize, that people, that the public recognize, compared to maybe 4 years ago or 8 years ago when no one really knew many names. Today, I think there are superstars in women's football.
And then certainly here in France, just the past few days, the National Rail, SNCF, they have a nationwide campaign. So every train station in the country has a poster of the French national team. But I understand that in Britain that they've, you know, even gone further with sort of getting behind the English team. So tell us what you've seen on the streets of the UK.
Well, we've seen various murals have been put up in significant places around the UK. So, for example, Beth Mead, the Arsenal forward, she is from Whitby originally in the northeast of England, and there's a mural there. And they've basically picked out all of those key locations around the UK and put up these various murals. We've also seen that a campaign, I believe, is backed by Twitter. They've also done kind of similar portraits and artwork. And you can go through sort of train stations and town centres and shopping malls, and you will see these huge billboards advertising the Lionesses, encouraging people to either watch coverage on television or buy tickets to a game. And there's an awful lot of coverage for the shirts as well, the Nike shirts. Obviously, it's the first time that the girls have had a bespoke kit, and they're going down very well.
And I'm actually wondering whether or not to invest probably 50, 60 euros in the Nigerian shirt or the English shirt. That remains to be seen. Now, there are 4 newcomers in this World Cup, Chile, Jamaica, Scotland and South Africa, which for me is a sign of the growing popularity, as we've been talking about, of women's football around the world. I mean, take, for instance, Jamaica, who I'll be following next week in Grenoble. Until 5 years ago, they didn't even have a women's team. But then Bob Marley's daughter, Cedella Marley, stepped in and she bankrolled basically the women's team via her father, Bob Marley's foundation. So that's a really nice story, and we'll be speaking to her on Sunday. So hopefully she'll be in the programme next week. Scotland, as I said, are among the newcomers. So Claire, tell us what you know about their journey, Scotland's journey to this World Cup.
Well, it went right to the wire for them. They were waiting on a result between Switzerland and Poland. Like I say, as we were talking earlier with Shelley Kerr, she's built a very strong, very determined side. Obviously, Scotland in their first ever World Cup. But it did look a little bit unsure towards the end. There was, as the match was drawing to a close, the players were looking to the bench. Shelley Kerr, the manager, was being informed by her backroom staff. They were all kind of keeping an eye, probably on social media and so on, with colleagues dotted around Europe, keeping tabs on all of those games. So it did go right to the wire for Scotland, the hard way, but they're there now. You know, they're in a World Cup for the first time, and they've done something that the men haven't done since 1998, I think.
That is a good point, actually, because you don't equate Scotland with male football, at least, but with women's football, yeah. And, you know, strong side, not sure about their ranking, but do you think they'll make it through the group stages?
I think there could be a surprise candidate, actually. One player which was particularly impressed me is Erin Cuthbert at Chelsea. Still only 20, scores phenomenal goals. Actually scored an incredible one at Hampden Park the other night against Jamaica. I think even she was surprised it went in. I don't think she actually understands just how good she is. But I think if Scotland can keep a clean bill of health, which they've struggled to at other tournaments they've been in 2017 in the Euros, I think they could be a surprise candidate. They're certainly fired up and ready to go, and Shelley Kerr drives a tight ship.
It's good to know. But while women's football has come a long way in recent years, there's still a long way to go in terms of equal pay, both at the national level but also at the club level. I mean, even in Norway, where the Football Federation recently have agreed to pay women the same as men playing for the national team. At the club level, women struggle to make a living there in Norway. I was speaking to Emily Naudnes yesterday. She's a defender for the team, and she's 20 years old, so she's still at university, but she says that she's almost certainly going to have to get a career aside from her football, even though she is playing in the Premier Division there in Norway. So, and then Katavan, just turning to you, France 24 rather, interviewed Ada Hegerberg recently. Now, for our listeners rather, who don't know who she is, just fill us in on Ada Hegerberg and her kind of story.
Well, she is the best player, women's football player in the world. She recently won the first ever women's Ballon d'Or. The Ballon d'Or is almost like the Player of the Year, but it was reserved to the men up until now. So she is the best player, but she will not be taking part in this World Cup. She has dropped out of the Norway Football Federation, taking a stand on the inequality between the men and women. Now, she hasn't been with them since 2017, so it was before that they struck that agreement for equal pay. And when Annette Young interviewed her for the show 51%, Ada Hegerberg, the first question was, why did you decide to take that stand? She said, I tried. I fought from within, from inside, trying to change, trying to get them to understand, and seeing how we were treated. I felt that at some point I had to take a bigger stand, which was leaving the team because nothing was changing. And then the second question was, well, why, now that they have equal pay, does that still stand? And her first answer was, it's not just about money, because there's no money in women's football. That's what she said. And she said that it's not just about money. It's not just about equal pay. It's about how they are treated. And we've seen it around the world, how they travel to venues, which hotels they stay at, their gear, the pitches. There was a big fight in the US because the women had to train on AstroTurf as opposed to a real pitch. So it's more than just getting exactly the same amount of money. It's the treatment and the respect, and that was her main point for Ada Hegerberg.
It's interesting you say that, because earlier this week there was an event at UNESCO, whose headquarters are here in Paris, and I met with a young lady by the name of Nadia Nadim. Now, she's an incredible personal story. Just in brief, she escaped Afghanistan as a refugee, then encountered football in a refugee camp in Denmark, and today plays for the national team. But Denmark aren't in this World Cup, and part of the reason for that is that the players went on strike last year during the qualifying stages, and then were to play Sweden, their arch rivals, but because they were on strike, they didn't play, and then that pretty much contributed to them losing out in their group stages. But she said it's not just about the pay, exactly as Ada is saying. It's also about the equal treatment, which I thought was quite interesting, because Nadia Nadim today plays for PSG, and I think she has a reasonable salary, probably a little bit better than the French public sector. respect to salary, that's for sure. But still, at the national level, these debates about around the treatment of players. So now at the club level, let's turn to you, Claire. You're based in England. Obviously, on the men's level, England, the Premiership is multi-billion-dollar, euro, pound, whatever you want to call it, business. But the situation at the club level for women in England, just fill us in on that, please.
It's very different. WSL1, the equivalent to the Premier League, the top flight of women's football, has only been fully professional for a short time, just a couple of years. So the clubs with money can obviously pay players anything from maybe 20 to 30,000 pounds per year, still well below the 150 grand a week that you might see from some of the big stars in the Premier League. But it very much is dictated by how much money these clubs have got and the backing that they have. So, for example, WSL2, the second tier of English football for women in the UK, Manchester United entered their first women's team into that league, but they could afford to be fully professional, even though they were competing against clubs who, had low budgets. Most of their players also had part-time jobs. So at the first time of asking, they've been promoted to WSL1, which is not really a surprise. And then you see the likes of Man City, who are actually the first team to give all of their players professional contracts, full-time professional contracts, and they introduced things like the same level of nutrition and expertise and training that the men would have. But then you have clubs the likes of Yeovil, who they're relegated. They were professional at one stage due to a lack of funding. Those dreams for a lot of those girls have come crashing down because the club just don't have the finances to keep going.
But then on the men's circuit, as it were, a lot of it comes down to advertising. So I wonder what sort of needs to happen in order to be able to pull in more advertising to women's football. I mean, does women's football sort of still have an image problem, or what do you think?
I think it's more about making sure women's football is part of the conversation 365 days a year in the same way it is with the men's football. So we shouldn't just be peaking in and around big tournaments like we are now, where everybody's talking about the World Cup, but this should have really consistent media coverage across all platforms, and I think that will help to drive the audience, educate an audience. It's actually amazing how many fans of the Premier League who are avid followers of the English Premier League who've never been to a WSL game, and for example, towards the end of the season we had Lyon playing Chelsea at Kingsmeadow Stadium in the semi-final of the Women's Champions League, and it was sold out, but it's still only a very, very small crowd. The stadium has a capacity of about 8,000 people. So I think if it's part of the conversation longer term, and we start to see them engaging with sponsors, and they have campaigns on billboards and things, as we're seeing around the national team, then perhaps we can take it further.
The situation in the US, I get the impression, is very different, because all of the women I spoke to yesterday, both from Nigeria and then also from Norway, I asked them the sort of question, about their future, what do they want next, and all of them said to me, the US, with stars in their eyes. What are the US doing to get it right, do you think?
They've got a long history of doing it right, and I think that's always been very attractive for a lot of players. And there was a point, certainly, where players felt like going to the US was their only option to take a professional career in football. It wasn't possible in any other nation. But that is slowly changing now. There's plenty of interest in going to the Women's League in Spain. Obviously, Barcelona have been very successful. France is now an option where we're seeing actually Man City are becoming a bit of a feeding ground for Lyon, and they're picking up players left, right and centre at the moment. So Nikita Paris is about to head over to Lyon after the World Cup. So, the Americans are doing it very well. They fill out stadiums. They have huge support, which is something actually going back to Nadia Nadim. I know she talked about during her time in the US. It's something which took her a long time to adjust to in England, because that kind of frenzy, that crazy support, that army of fans that follow you everywhere you go, just wasn't there for her in England, and I think that was something that she really missed.
And she did actually tell me that she's happier here at PSG, but I think that's more a case of, she said that, living in a big world city as opposed to rainy Manchester. But we've spoken a little bit about Lyon as well during this programme, Qatar. There's Lyon, there's obviously PSG, but what other sort of teams are there here in France that are professional, do we know?
I mean, a lot of them are professional. The problem in France is that you really have a huge gap between Paris Saint-Germain, Lyon, and then the rest of, maybe Montpellier a little bit is kind of in the middle, and then the rest of the teams just can't compete with these two giants. I mean, even Paris Saint-Germain has trouble competing with Lyon, which has the best players, the most money, the biggest infrastructure. So there's still a big gap before we have a competitive league in France.
But lots happening, but as we say, takeaway, still much more to do. Thank you very much, Ketavan Gojikani, for joining us on Radio France International today, and also to you, Claire Bloomfield. Thank you both, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone. That brings us to the end of Paris Live for today. Do join us again tomorrow, 100 hours GMT. Goodbye.